today we have the story of a revolution that came terrifyingly close to igniting the Third World War. Oof. And to tell it, we'll be visiting an ambitious complex whose fortunes painfully mirror this tumultuous chapter of history and forced its architects to flee for their lives.
Fleeing architects is never a good sign, I find.
Better sign than flea-infested architects, though.
Fleeing what?
Flea-infested.
Flea-infested, right,
Doi,
yeah.
doi, 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 doi.
No, that's less pleasant for them, perhaps.
This is Where'd Everyone Go? With me, Sasha Auerbach.
And me, Tom Ward. A journey into the weird history of abandoned places. So where are we in the world, Sasha?
We are in the Caribbean island of Cuba, on the outskirts of the capital, Havana, to be precise.
So from the footage, this area looks unbelievably lush and tropical. Palm trees everywhere.
Yeah, but then among the trees, you see these beautiful orange terracotta tiles, and they're arranged in this spectacular configuration.
Yeah, there are these kind of domes, maybe 20, 30 domes, kind of mushroom shapes, all arranged in a spiraling pattern.
Yeah, and look, they're linked together, too, with those long, flowing, covered corridors. I mean, it looks almost more like an animal or something that was grown than something that was built.
Yeah, it kind of looks like an octopus from above, doesn't it? If I may be so bold.
Yeah.
There's not a right angle to be seen.
No, it's maybe a sculpture, an art installation, but it's all buildings that are serving some purpose.
But it does kind of look like it's not complete, almost like the parts of it at least are the bare bones, and that there's something else supposed to be there. Is that about right?
Yeah, animal that didn't reach its full maturity.
Right then, Sasha, what the heck is this place? How did it get tied up in a revolution, and where did everyone go?
Where indeed. All right, the scene is 1950s Cuba, at the time ruled by the dictatorship of the former soldier Fulgencio Batista. This is a very corrupt and rather brutal government. He jailed his opponents, he used terror, and made fortunes for himself and his associates. He was tied in with the mafia, prostitution, gambling, smuggling, absolutely rife in Cuba at the time. But his regime was finally toppled in 1958 by rebel forces led by a former lawyer, Fidel Castro.
I know him.
You know him?
Yes.
Personally?
Not personally. I know. I can see him. Cigars, shirts with epaulets.
Yep. Military uniform.
Khaki-colored clothing.
Yeah. Now, Castro has a very bad rep in the U.S. Is identified as an opponent of all things capitalist and democratic, and his history is actually a little bit more complicated than that, and we'll get into it. But Castro first tried to overthrow Batista in 1953 by storming an army barracks with about 160 men, but most of his compatriots were killed, and he himself was imprisoned. Then in 1955, he was released and fled to Mexico, where he began organizing an invading force of Cuban exiles. He returns to Cuba a year later, arriving on a yacht with 81 men, but once again, things don't go according to plan. Most of his force are again killed or captured. But this time, Castro gets away, and crucially, he escapes with his loyal lieutenant, Ernesto Che Guevara.
Okay, and that must be significant because you don't get onto T-shirts for nothing.
Exactly. And my favorite version of that T-shirt, my mate had this in college. It had that silhouette of Che with his beret and the red star looking up like this, and underneath the caption was, "I have no idea who this is."
I think, when a revolutionary starts being put on things, merchandise, magnets, T-shirts, I feel like the original spirit of the revolution may have been dampened.
Yeah, I wonder what my friend was trying to indicate as he was an Oklahoman who grew up and his father was a banker. So why he had a T-shirt of Che Guevara to begin with is a little bit of mixed messaging, I think.
Well, I think at least he's making a comment on society there. And how idiots co-opt important movements and turn them into high street trash.
And he was big on ironic T-shirts. He had another one that said, "Guns don't kill people. Men with mustaches kill people."
Nice.
All right. So,
I like people who wear novelty T-shirts.
Yes, so
I am interested by them. I think they're the unique species. I saw a guy wearing a T-shirt that said "fart loading," and it had a buffering sign underneath it. He was just walking through a petrol station. And I was like, "Who is that for? Who are you trying? What are you doing? Why? You know, there's so many questions there."
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make one of my favorite T-shirts. It's a very obscure political reference. It's from the 1980s, and it says, "Don't blame me. I voted for Bill the Cat."
Nice.
Which is a Bloom County reference. But anyway, back to Cuba and the revolution. So from the date of Castro's landing, Cuba was in a state of civil war. Insurrections broke out all across the country. And the Cuban economy was disrupted because their main industry at the time, and for much of the second half of the 20th century, was sugar. And the sugar mills were burnt. Plantations, plantations were burnt as well. And the tourists obviously would avoid the place during all this. So tourism was a big industry, and that goes down.
Yeah, tourists famously don't like insurrections.
Or burning plantations.
Or sugar shortages. We wanted to go to Cuba for our holiday, but
it was on fire.
We didn't like this look of the social revolution taking place there. The hotel was burned down.
I did get this nice T-shirt. Do you have any idea who this is? So in 1958, a rebel group led by Che Guevara captures an armored train filled with arms and ammunition that were desperately needed by the government forces. And this was the breaking point for Batista and his dictatorship. He swiftly relinquishes the presidency and flees the country. Castro assumes power, becoming prime minister, and the Cubans saw Castro as a romantic figure, and that relationship is going to be up and down. But actually, he's going to stay popular throughout most of his rule.
Okay.
You do have arrests of political opponents. You have some reports of torture, like the UN does criticize Cuba for its human rights record, and quite rightly. And there are going to be periodic arrests of potential counter-revolutionaries with executions. Okay. Not excessive, but I would say any summary executions are already excessive.
Right.
Initially, he promises free elections, but they're postponed indefinitely. In part, this is because of the tension with the United States. We'll get back to that.
Okay, I'm worried that Castro is going to turn into the ultimate cliche of promising many lovely things and then turning into a monster.
Well, no, I don't think that's a fair characterization. I mean, he does, his major programs were kind of moderate socialist programs, things like fixing the healthcare system, educational system. In fact, to this day, Cuba has the highest literacy rate of any country in the world at 99% of all adults, significantly higher than either the UK or the US. Wow. But what gets him in trouble and what gets him a reputation is that he's very anti-capitalist, and he was also committed to the international revolution. So he wanted to see not just capitalism eradicated in Cuba and replaced with a fully socialist, fully communist government, but he wanted to see that happen all over Latin America. Mm-hmm. He saw the politics of Africa and Latin America as being manipulated by the great powers, particularly the United States. Mm-hmm. He's not wrong on that score. Mm-hmm. Anyway. So he becomes enemy number one, not because for the U.S., not just because the U.S. was that worried about Cuba. Keep in mind, he's not allied with the Soviets yet, but merely because he's going to serve as an inspirational figure to other potential socialist and communist revolutionaries all across.
He's influential,
Latin America. Yeah. I mean, he's also, Cuba has promised military and financial support to those rebels.
Right. Okay.
It should be noted that most of those rebels are fighting against hard right-wing governments that are practicing extrajudicial executions and terror of their own, right? So it's a whole other story, but it's this ideological battle. Anyway, the CIA sends in 1,500 Cuban exiles to invade the island and try to topple Castro in what becomes known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, just 2 years earlier, America was the first country in the world to recognize the legitimacy of Castro's new government. So it's a massive change in direction for America as far as Castro is concerned. The CIA-backed invasion fails, and the U.S. ends up paying Castro $53 million in food and medicine in exchange for the captured prisoners.
I mean, that's double humiliation, isn't it, for the US? And they wouldn't have taken that well, I'm guessing. And I mean, you invade, your invasion fails, and then you have to pay for the privilege of your failed invasion. That can't have been good for relations.
Yeah, well, the whole thing was poorly conceived and poorly organized from the beginning. So small wonder that it completely went haywire. So this worsens relations between the U.S. and Cuba, which were already strained. The U.S. severs diplomatic ties. Actually, mutually, they sever diplomatic ties. And Castro's rule of Cuba is now unopposed. He sets about reforming the country. As I mentioned, he vastly expands the country's social services, extending them to all classes of society on an equal basis. And he made educational and health measures available to all Cubans free of charge, which is true to this very day. Healthcare in Cuba is free, as is education all the way up through university and graduate school. Yeah, that doesn't sound too bad, eh?
That sounds pretty good. Okay.
A wave of optimism sweeps over the war-torn country in the early 60s, and this is where our beautiful complex comes into the story.
Okay, so things are looking up for Cuba after the initial wave of executions, torture, postponement of free elections.
Invasion by CIA-sponsored would-be rebels. Yes.
Yeah, so things are starting to turn and people are starting to warm to Castro.
No, he remains popular all throughout.
He's been popular from day one.
Castro is, at his core, he's a Cuban nationalist, but then he's an international socialist. You know, so he's not. I mean, we can't put him in the same category as really brutal dictators like Pol Pot or Stalin or any of those guys. Like, it's not.
Well,
the actual
Mao.
casualties in the entire Cuban Revolution are relatively low for this type of conflict, under 5,000 on both sides.
Okay.
So it's not this horrible, nasty. This isn't Saddam Hussein. Like, this is a dude that cares about his countrymen, but he's also a realist too.
Okay, so what exactly is this site?
Well, now we've got to start with this lovely game of golf, right? So the big sport in Cuba, do you know what it is?
Baseball?
Baseball! Yes, all Cubans love baseball. Fidel Castro, absolutely no exception.
Okay.
But he also likes a nice game of golf. And here you see Fidel Castro and Che Guevara pictured playing a game of golf in our now abandoned location.
Okay. So it was something else when they arrived.
Yes.
It was a golf course.
Yes, it was part of the ritziest, most exclusive country club in all of Havana. However, by the time they arrive, it's empty. All the members had fled during the revolution, so Castro and Guevara romp around these green acres playing golf while their official photographer snaps publicity shots like this one.
I mean, you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a scene from Fight Club.
Well, also, I mean, think of the symbolism of it. Like, after these years of civil war and invasion, what signals peace and stability more than a nice round of golf?
Yeah, and the guys behind them look like, no matter what, even if he does the worst shot ever in golf, they're going to be like, good, very good. They look terrified and supportive.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they were any good or not, but as we've learned from recent political leaders, actually being good at the game you want to be seen playing matters not a whit at all. So, point is that they're giving it the old college try.
Yeah, we don't know where that ball landed.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Who cares? Yeah. I mean, he is using a very small putter, though.
Yeah, he's using a child's putter.
Awkward position.
That's bad for your back, Fidel.
Well, the rich people took all the good clubs when they left, and they only left their kids' clubs.
Right.
Because they're the cheap ones. Anyway, so this was a place that guys like Castro and Guevara, and indeed the ordinary people of Cuba, had never been allowed to get anywhere near prior to the revolution. And afterwards, they're sitting around at the country club bar, drinking mojitos, and they start talking about what a shame it is that this area has been inaccessible to most of the Cuban people. Shouldn't they have a chance to experience this beautiful spot as well? So they hatch a plan, a very ambitious plan, to change the golf course into something else entirely. A national school of art.
Okay.
They wanted to bring art and art education to the underprivileged, to nurture excellence in ballet, modern dance, visual arts, music, and drama. And for revolutionaries, art is very important. Art is there to serve the revolution. And this linking of culture and politics is an age-old connection.
And when you say serve the revolution, what do you mean by that? As in propaganda or?
Well, art can do many things, not necessarily propaganda, but it would certainly, to cultivate Cuban artists and for Cuban artists to emerge out of now revolutionary Cuba would be a demonstration of its sort of creative energy. That it's, you don't need capitalism to produce great art. Like it's a socialist revolution, a revolution of the people that really allows their creative energy to flow freely.
Okay, and would these artworks be allowed out of Cuba? Would they be shared with the world somehow, or it would remain in Cuba?
What their plan for it is not clear. They would certainly want to publicize it, but then again, national art is generally considered a national treasure. So governments, not just the Cuban government, governments all over the world are often a little bit cagey about letting like absolutely seminal pieces of artwork out. I mean, the Mona Lisa travels, but there's no doubt about who it actually belongs to, right? So Castro brings in a young Cuban architect, a man named Ricardo.
Hang on, who does the Mona Lisa belong to?
Well, it ironically belongs to France, even though it was painted by an Italian artist, Leonardo da Vinci.
Okay, and
I'm sure Castro would not approve.
Why does it belong to France?
I guess they bought it at some point. I mean, it hangs in the Louvre, so.
Right. I mean, I feel like the Mona Lisa is one of the luckiest women ever. I mean, who'd have thought that would be the photo? You know what I mean? The face. Of all the faces, that one.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she's bad looking. I'm just saying why that one?
The mysterious smile.
What is it about that picture that the culture tells me this is the picture? And I'm like, okay.
Personally, I'm a big fan of Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical drawings. And I once saw his notebooks. We're in a circulating expedition, traveling exhibition, and I still remember there's this beautiful drawing of a human body with a musculature and the skeletal structure, and he's got his little notes on the side, and he writes something like, "I do not know how someone seeing the incalculable beauty that is the human body would be so terrible as to want to destroy it."
I mean, maybe he hasn't seen some middle-aged men's bodies at the leisure centre that I go to.
Does it make you want to destroy them? Do you need help?
I don't want to destroy them. I just don't want them to be in front of me. And they're always in the sauna, and they seem to think that sauna is exercise. And then after the sauna, they go out for a massive kebab. And I'm like, mate, you haven't done anything. You just sweated for an hour.
Well, you know what they say, Tom. Beauty is only skin deep, but ugly goes straight to the bone.
Right, yeah, I completely agree. I think.
So back to the art school.
I think I agree.
You got to see past the little extra, just a sign of the good life.
I don't agree then. No, I think
you don't agree.
No, I'm just doing the maths on what you've said. There was some double negatives in there, and I couldn't quite work out what you were saying.
Oh, it's just there is that moment where you get up and you look in the mirror and you see your father's eyes.
Oh,
and then
God.
you look down
Dad?
and you see your father's gut. A couple of years later, you look down and you can't see anything because the gut's covered everything.
Oh, God.
We'll get there eventually.
Did Castro design this himself?
No, he didn't. He asked a young Cuban architect named Ricardo Porro to design the site.
Okay.
And he was given just 2 months to come up with the initial plans, so he recruited 2 friends to help him, Vittorio Garatti and Roberto Gottardi. Mm-hmm. Now, the young architects poured their hearts and souls into the project, taking inspiration from the changing times in which they found themselves. Apparently, Porro always thought of the school as a kind of erotic space. The domes were created to look like the breasts of a woman. And the corridors linking them were paths of desire. Well, no, I mean, all bodies are beautiful.
There really is nothing that men won't sexualize. This building is like breasts.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the alternate was we should create like the body of a middle-aged man, and this giant dome will be his beer gut. Like, why don't we go, Porro, can we rethink this one? Can we maybe think about Mona Lisa instead of, I don't know,
these 2 bulbous sagging roofs on his chest.
And this sort of gummy bit is where his toes would be. That's where you have the mushroom garden.
This flat area is his bum.
And this hairy bit was his ears. Yeah, I don't know why they didn't go with that one. That was option 2.
Yeah, that was option 2, yeah.
Okay. So it had a lot to do with the way people thought in the 1960s. Keep in mind what's going on. This is the period of sexual liberation, and the dropping of a lot of taboos about the way we view the human body and how much of it should be or can be displayed for it to be respectable or acceptable.
Yeah. So this building represents the breaking of taboos or the lifting of taboos, the kind of post-60s.
Well, it seems like to revel in the organic form in a very fundamental way. I mean, this is not the first architectural movement that embraced organic forms. I mean, you have the Spanish architect Gaudi, whose buildings look like they were grown rather than built. And keep in mind too that the female body has been a focus of artistic representation for thousands of years. Weirdly enough, it's only in the 19th century that the male body was considered kind of the locus of beauty, and you see the way men are dressed in this very kind of form-fitting clothing, and very tight clothing, whereas the women are sort of trying to conceal the body with very high collared-necked dresses and very long skirts. And then finally, in the interwar period, that all starts to loosen up, with the liberated woman and the flapper and the it girl and that kind of stuff, and that continues through in the 1950s and 1960s.
Right, and I do feel like the female body has won historically, and I think it will always, it's like Coca-Cola to Pepsi, isn't it? Well, the female body, the men are there with their Pepsi being like, hey, we're good, we look good too. And women are like, come on, have you got these? You
wouldn't know it by all the teenagers flexing and filming themselves in my gym changing room, which I really try to get in the background of those shots because I want to mess up whatever video they're making with my flabby ass self. It's like, oh, you want to flex? Like, here I am.
Here's your future, kid.
my sciatica.
It doesn't last.
Yeah,
boy.
you got like 2 more years like this, and then it's all downhill, pal.
Yeah, I looked like that 2 years ago. So all these curves are incredibly impressive. I mean, the workmanship that's gone into this, and and they would all have been on heat at the time as well, making it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge amount of work,
and I like the way that it seems to blend in with the natural landscape. And there are different architectural philosophies about this. Sometimes they stand out, some are supposed to blend in, so on and so forth. But these seem to, this lush. A tropical environment, they really seem like they're like fruits or something that are growing, strange fruits that are growing in the landscape, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah.
And that color, that terracotta tile is just so striking and lovely.
Yeah.
So a defining feature of the whole construction of it is what's called the Catalan arch. It's a technique that originated in the Catalonia region of Spain, where thin, lightweight bricks are laid in a herringbone pattern using very quick-drying cement. It's very quick to do because it doesn't require a heavy support structure like, say, vaulted ceilings, yet it's just as strong. And this is important because there was almost no steel available because the U.S. had imposed a trade embargo by this point, so you can't reinforce it with metal as you might in other types of construction. And think about it. The ingenious simplicity of the arch, right? Because the weight, the function, the physical function of the arch is it transfers the weight down and out, right? And that means that you can make the surrounding structure much thinner, which you can create these kind of graceful curves that you wouldn't be able to do with a kind of 90-degree angles.
Yeah, it's not a brutal look, is it?
No. It's that you can get that sort of organic, these kind of soaring, airy forms, right? And you see it in cathedrals in Europe as well. They make incredible use of arches. Well, the Catalan arch is taking it one step farther because it's using these lightweight bricks as well.
Right.
So when you look at how these domes, these amazing curves.
I didn't realize that the actual design was part of what made it effective. I thought that was a flourish, but actually that's beautiful that it's both at the same time.
Yeah,
one is causing the other almost.
I mean, that's why arches are such an important part of Roman architecture. The Romans loved arches precisely because of that. It's because of the way the kind of weight transfer works, which means you can change the way you structure it. It also makes it easier when you don't have that much weight on the supporting structures to put in windows or spaces, right? Because you can just have columns supporting it rather than a full structural wall.
Right.
So the excitement for the building was so great that after only 1 year of construction and before all the buildings were complete, the school's doors were opened. The students would play music for the construction workers, and there was this atmosphere of hope and excitement about the future of Cuba.
I mean, it must have been an absolute trip for the average person to suddenly be in an environment like this. I mean, it's probably unlike anything they've ever seen or been in, I'm guessing.
Well, certainly this is very original, but Cuba, keep in mind that Cuba is the oldest place of European colonial habitation in the Americas. So the architecture in Havana as a whole is absolutely breathtaking. Not all of it's in great shape. In fact, you can go down the Malecon, the main avenue, and you'll see everything ranging from these beautiful 18th or 19th century mansions that have been kept in excellent state to places that are basically rubble because they just didn't have the money to maintain them. But the buildings that are still standing and have maintained are just incredible. Like it's an indescribably beautiful city. So it's not as if Cubans had not seen beautiful architecture before, but this was the modern stuff. This was new and exciting.
Yeah.
So to young Cubans who wanted to study art, it was like discovering a brand new world. There was a real buzz about the place, and it really stimulated the imagination. Apparently, you walk along these corridors and you just lose a sense of where you are, where you're coming from, where you're going to, and that was intentional. The message the architects were trying to communicate, and architecture always communicates a message of one sort or another, is that Cuba had moved on from its history, had moved on from the corruption and violence of the past, and it was forging a new destiny, a new future for itself.
Right.
But
hasta la vista, Batista.
Hasta la vista, Batista. Hasta la victoria siempre. But this ideal would soon turn sour, and we'll find out why after the break. Now, Soviet influence in Cuba was growing, largely through the promise of economic support. And America sees Castro's friendliness to the Soviets as a direct threat to the United States. They were also worried that Castro, who, as I mentioned, is very anti-capitalist and very internationalist in his outlook, they're worried that the Cuban Revolution would serve as an inspiration to other Marxist revolutionary groups throughout South and Central America, who also were in many cases struggling against very, very corrupt, very, very violent regimes. But those regimes were often supported by the United States because those regimes were friendly to American businesses, were friendly to the fruit companies and the petroleum companies.
Okay.
And America at that point was practicing, for all their talk of really supporting democracy, they were practicing sphere of influence politics, which is as long as you had a regime that was friendly to the United States and open to United States business, they were willing to support you at least tacitly, if not explicitly. So America was politically embedded with some pretty nasty figures in Central and South America. Not that these Marxist revolutionaries were saints themselves. They were more than willing to use violence and terror to try to retrieve their revolutionary ends as well. So you have America on one side, you have Castro on the other, and Castro is starting to buddy up to the Soviets who are promising economic support.
So the US government are getting twitchy at this point.
They're getting twitchy. But what actually triggers the crisis was not the actions of the Cubans or the Soviets, it was actions of the United States in Europe. America, in an attempt to contain Soviet communism, decides to place Jupiter missiles, these are long-range nuclear-capable missiles, in Italy and, more importantly, in Turkey, right next to the Soviet border.
Right.
And at that point, the Soviets decide to respond in kind by planning on installing nuclear-capable missiles in Cuba.
Okay.
So, when a CIA consultant looking at these surveillance photos spots soccer fields along the coast in Cuba, and this is in September of 1962, he becomes concerned because, as he put it, Cubans play baseball, Russians play soccer.
Wow. Yeah.
The CIA analyst had deduced that the field indicated the presence of a Soviet military camp nearby.
Okay. I mean, if you are paranoid already, that's the kind of jump you'd make, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess there wasn't a lot of opportunity to play hockey because that's what Russians really play.
Yeah, there wasn't
more so than soccer.
Ice hockey?
Ice hockey.
Yeah. There wouldn't have been enough ice in Cuba, I'm guessing, at that time. So was this? This is the Cuban Missile Crisis.
This is the famous Cuban Missile Crisis.
Start of it.
Though it should be realistically called the Cuban, Italian, Turkish Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
So Kennedy approves spy plane flights over Cuba because he wants hard evidence of that the Soviets are placing missiles there. The photographs come back and they convince Kennedy that the Russians are indeed doing exactly that. And his advisors tell him that 30 million American lives are in danger of a missile launched from Cuban soil. Kennedy announces to the world that large, long-range weapons of mass destruction pose an existential threat to the United States.
Yeah.
Russia then responds by sending 25 ships towards Cuba, and the White House thought it was the early stages of the Third World War.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge escalation, isn't it? 25 ships arriving.
Well, the U.S. basically doesn't want the Soviet Union delivering any more supplies for these missiles, so they blockade Cuba.
Right.
And now it looks like these Soviet ships are heading right towards the blockade.
Okay, I would love to have seen
now,
that.
it's worth
White
pointing
House
out
meeting,
that a blockade is actually itself considered an act of war, but the U.S. has not declared war on Cuba or on the Soviet Union, nor have they reciprocated.
Okay. Still majorly tense.
Yes. And there's all kinds of back channel negotiations going on at this point because neither side really wants war, but the Soviets want those missiles out of Italy and Turkey, and the U.S. is not going to tolerate the missiles in Cuba.
Right.
So these back channel negotiations desperately going on, and at the last minute, the Soviet ships turn around. They don't challenge the blockade.
Oof.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank God someone backed down.
Yes.
We might not be here today.
And for the first time, the Soviet premier, Nikita Khrushchev, publicly acknowledges the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. He argues that they're merely defensive, and he promises to remove them if JFK promises not to invade Cuba. But, again, back channels on the sly, JFK has also promised to remove the missiles, the offensive missiles from Italy and Turkey.
Okay.
But he didn't want to lose face, so that's not part of the public announcement. The public announcement is, we made the Soviets back down over Cuba. But in truth, it was horse trading.
Right, okay.
America responds to the Soviet demand, and the Soviets respond to the American demand.
Okay. And so I'm wondering, so that wouldn't have been in the history books at first?
No, that only comes out later.
Okay, yeah.
So the Cuban Missile Crisis is a real watershed moment in the history of Cuban-Soviet relations.
Okay.
First off, Cuba has to put more money into defense. Secondly, it's going to increasingly draw closer to the Soviets. And it's funny because Castro was at times critical of Soviet policy. He wanted to see more support for the South American and Central American revolutionaries, but eventually, over time in the 60s, the Cuban economy becomes more and more dependent on the Soviet economy. In particular, because the Cuban economy never really develops well industrially, and sugar remains the main industry well into the 1970s and even into the 1980s. And the Soviets promised to buy Cuban sugar even at highly inflated prices. At its height, those exports to the Soviet Union represent something like 30% of the entire Cuban economy. Well, think about it, because America has imposed a trade embargo. The other Central and South American states generally won't trade with Cuba because they all have, either right-wing governments or governments that are otherwise hostile to the Cubans because they don't want the same type of revolutions to happen there. So Cuba is very much isolated. It can only trade with the Soviet Union.
Right, and that gives Soviet Union a lot of power.
A lot of leverage, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So is this period bad for our place, our school of eros and love and knowledge, understanding?
Yes, because with these closer ties to the Soviet Union, Castro starts to implement government controls and especially government monitoring over culture that looks a lot more like what's being done in the Soviet Union, which is, say, a bit more, considerably more repressive.
Okay.
And increasingly identify any type of bourgeois conceit, any type of middle class conceit as being something that needs to be purged from Cuban society.
The arts
and
always
culture.
get hit the hardest in these moments.
Yeah, but there's also an aesthetic effect, right? Because the Soviets preferred this very utilitarian, kind of blocky architectural styles, and this type of fanciful stuff was considered a bourgeois conceit, an unnecessary expense that is not compatible with the ideals of the socialist revolution.
Yes,
or
clinical,
communist revolution, rather.
cold.
Yeah,
brutal.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, when you see the types of buildings that the Soviets were building, they're very grand, they're very large, but they're very utilitarian.
Mm-hmm. Function
Nothing
first.
like this fantastical, organic stuff that Porro and his collaborators were putting together.
Yeah.
So what had earlier been seen as this grand experiment in creativity and artistic freedom now starts to look a bit bourgeois, a bit indulgent.
Fancy
In a way that's incompatible with the new kind of sternness of the Cuban-Soviet cooperation. So construction was stopped, and the school is closed down. But not entirely. A Russian circus group did use the old ballet hall for a period at least.
Nice.
The Russians do love their ballet.
Those dancing bears would have seen nothing like it.
Those dancing bears.
There was bears, dancing bears?
I don't know that much about the Russian circus, to be honest.
Or was it just ballet and trapeze and...
It was mostly just a clown reading Karl Marx.
Right. Yeah, that sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, less laughs, less for the kids, that one.
Yeah, and you can't have animals because, they're part of the People's Revolution
and
as
they
well.
know they're out there fighting.
They're unionized.
Yeah.
The Teamsters were bad. Try messing with the Lions Union.
Yeah.
They will literally tear you up.
Yep. Conceptually and physically.
But for the people who designed the School of Arts, things get even worse. They were cast as bourgeois enemies of the revolution. And the Ministry of Construction led a campaign to destroy their reputations. The lead architect, Porro, well, his home was attacked using santeria, a kind of Caribbean voodoo practice. And he was given a demeaning job. He was assigned to design a cage for an eagle in the zoo. It was a considerable step down from designing this wonderful School of Art.
He's basically scapegoated, isn't he?
Yeah, and the thing is too is that these grand projects, whenever they're linked to a political purpose, they live or die by that purpose. And as long as your person and your leader and the person who favored you is in ascendance, you're great. But if the winds of politics change, there goes your whole project.
It's like, do you need to scapegoat the architects? Can it not just be like, sorry guys, stand down. We're going to change these curved roofs for flat roofs now. Why do they need to turn these guys into villains?
Keep in mind this was the flagship project. I mean, it's one of the flagship architectural projects. And if you want to signal a change in the culture, what better way to do it than to reverse course on this indulgence?
But then just say, surely the public will know that the government have said to these guys weren't doing it on their own volition.
True. Well, I'm trying to play devil's advocate again. Put another way, you have to imagine, that the U.S. government or the British government begins this giant vanity project. We're going to build
a wall.
We're going to build the world's a wall. Okay, moving on from an actual vanity project. We're going to build the world's largest skyscraper, and it's going to be a public building, and it's going to have schools and government offices and blah blah, and it's going to be 5,000 feet tall. And then the regime changes, the administration in power changes, and inflation rises, and consumer prices are going up, and pretty much what's happening right now. What is it going to say to your population if you're like, no, we're doubling down, we're still going to build this Uber scraper,
Right.
And it's like, no,
Uber scraper.
The Uber scraper.
It's the Germans.
Yes. Something so you clean your car with. Alva's the Uber scraper. Ha ha. It takes the paint right off.
Did your Uber arrive covered in ice? Try this Uber scraper.
This is the superior scraper. So, these symbols matter.
Okay, I just feel sorry for the architect.
I do too. Porro was absolutely devastated, and he leaves Cuba for exile in Paris. His colleague, Vittorio Garatti, was arrested on false accusations of espionage. He's jailed, and he too is eventually expelled from Cuba.
Oh man! And what about Castro?
Oh, Castro remains in power until 2008.
Oh, he's fine.
He stays popular. Okay. The Cuban economy goes through these periods of ups and downs. They actually very wisely. It's a long story. I don't want to get too much into it, but as we move towards the 1970s and 1980s, he continues this project of trying to nurture Marxist revolutions around the world and gets really deeply involved both in the Ethiopian civil war, but also in the Angolan conflict with South Africa.
Right.
And, keep in mind, this is apartheid South Africa. But the Cubans they funnel money and troops to Angola, first as trainers and then as actually military combatants, whereas the South Africans start to do the same thing on the other side. And that is actually one of the bloodiest parts of this whole equation. Is not the Cuban Revolution. As I said, it's not that violent. And though Castro supports these other revolutions in South America, Cubans do not get that directly involved.
Okay.
By the end of his reign, though, he has stationed, I think it's over 200,000 Cuban troops around the world. Wow. Like they really are he puts his money where his mouth is, and he puts his troops where his mouth is. But for example, he condemned Chinese involvement in Vietnam. He said, this is just another kind of imperialism. Uh-huh. So it's not like he was completely supportive of all, communist regimes everywhere. He believed in a kind of national self-determination as a road to this international communist revolution.
So a purist.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. He still compromises. For example, when the Soviet Union, crushes the Prague Spring, he supports it because he knows that, he's getting so much economic support from Russia.
Yeah.
Anyway, this conflict in Angola really blows up, and that's where you finally get the great powers intervening and saying, look, we've got to put a stop to this. Mm-hmm. And you have this conference that involves the Soviet Union, Cuba, the United States, Angola, and South Africa. And what they basically agree is that South Africa will withdraw its forces from the conflict, Cuba will withdraw its forces, and there's kind of a drawdown.
Okay.
So because he's such a national figure and because he's such an inspiration, he remains really popular. He also very wisely starts to pivot in the 80s and 90s as communist regimes fall around the world, and then 89 the Soviet Union, that falls apart too. He actually pivots the Cuban economy towards biotechnology and tourism. So the 70s is a really bad time, early 80s is a really bad time. When you get into the late 80s and 90s, the Cuba stages a bit of an economic recovery. And that's also partly, Castro's leadership.
Okay, so he's basically popular across the board with...
Very, very popular with other Marxist leaders. And, just a very complex, I think, and interesting political figure. And regardless of how you feel about Cuba and communism, I don't know. One has to acknowledge that of all the leaders in the Western Hemisphere, he was really the one who most consistently and successfully resisted U.S. hegemony, U.S. attempts to control these societies through economic and social, cultural, and political, and when necessary, military means.
Yeah.
Cuba remains independent.
Yeah.
And they're fiercely proud.
And that takes a lot.
You go to Cuba, you can go to Cuba now, and there's not a huge amount of anti-American sentiment. They recognize that things are different now. And there's certainly kind of a rapprochement under Carter and later under Obama. So the Cubans aren't, violently anti-American, but they are very, very proud to be Cubans and to have maintained their independence when so many other regimes, fell to manipulation and were completely controlled. Because Cuba wasn't a puppet of the Soviet Union; they were an ally. But they ran their own affairs.
Yeah. So Cubans sit in the town square in a Starbucks and in a McDonald's writing blogs about how proud they are of their independence.
No, I think you're thinking of people in Boston.
Right. So has Cuba managed to keep American imports out in terms of cultural exports?
Yeah,
There's
by and large.
And
it's still a lot of just
garish
Cuban stuff. And they actually have two different forms of currency. They have an exchangeable currency, which foreigners use, and then they have an internal currency, which the Cubans use, because they're worried at too much. They're worried exactly that too much foreign investment will penetrate and that will give other countries leverage to control Cuban affairs.
Right. So if you come in with that tourist money, they look at you in a different way.
Yeah, I mean,
hold it up.
They're very friendly. No, they're happy. They're happy because that's the exchangeable. That's the good stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the good currency.
Nice.
Anyway, but he remains international enemy number one to the U.S. In fact, it's been said that more so than he has had more people trying to murder him more times than anybody else in history. It's estimated there were over 600 assassination attempts on Castro.
600?
Yes, including the CIA trying to poison his milkshake.
Nice.
Apparently Castro was obsessed with milk, so they go for the...
I feel like I read about this. I think there was a capsule that was left in a freezer, and when the waiter that was basically in the CIA went to get the capsule, it broke. It was stuck to the freezer, and then all the stuff fell out of the capsule, and he couldn't get it into the milkshake. I think maybe if he loved milkshakes that much, he might have noticed the taste of,
For want of
was it bitter almonds in cyanide?
Yes,
that's
I
what it
believe
tastes
so.
like. Smells
I mean,
like.
I haven't really tasted much cyanide recently.
No.
I
Since
be
your
careful?
last assassination attempt.
My last assassination. I've stayed away from milk.
Is that
also,
many?
But also, what adult drinks milk? That's a bit weird to begin with. Like, you're obsessed with rum or beer or something, or, even Coca-Cola, but milk?
If you went out on a date with a beautiful lady and she asked for a glass of milk, would that put you off? Would it give you the ick?
Yeah.
Just a glass of milk.
I'll just
for
have
me,
a glass
please.
of cold milk.
I think it'd
Preferably
be worse.
fresh. Do you have unpasteurized? No, I love that raw milk. Yeah, that
it'd be worse if a
be
guy did it.
I'd do that'd be one of those ones where I go to the bathroom and just never come back.
Crawl out the window.
Crawl out the window.
Crawl through the vent.
Yes.
So judgmental.
It's so judgmental. You'd be super happy if it was like,
If it was oat milk.
do you like milk? I love milk. Blah, 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 blah. Let's just go. This is disturbing. This is a different podcast
website.
now. I'm not comfortable. Let's go back to the
You brought up the
weirdly
nipple.
shaped. So, this school, it is experiencing an unexpected renaissance. The ambitious design is finally being given the credit it deserves in internationally renowned architecture publications, and there's even talk of funding from Europe being made available to finally complete the project.
Oh, nice.
And that's the new Cuba.
Because it looks like it's in incredible condition. Like the picture that we've got here.
Well, everything
doesn't-
looks great from a distance.
Well, yeah,
so when
but
you get close, you see it's drinking large glasses of milk, and it's
Right.
a little bit
The
creepy.
it's still very bright. It looks crisp. It doesn't look obviously decayed, but obviously it's been there since the 60s.
Yeah, and
So
it's
going to have some signs of
It's
wear.
that saying, it's not the location, it's the foundation. So who knows what's going on under the surface?
Okay. But it's great that it's getting a second life.
Yeah. Here's hoping. I think it's amazing. I wish I've been to Cuba, and I wish I'd had a chance to go and see it because wow, it's unlike any building I've ever seen before.
We should do a day trip for the pod.
A day
We'll
trip,
put it-
a Cuban day trip.
We'll put it behind a paywall if
Yeah.
you want to see
Yeah.
me and Sasha go to Cuba to visit.
Yeah, and yes, and for viewers at home, Lewis is nodding enthusiastically.
Yeah,
so we
producer.
already have approval. We just have to get it by Henry, and we're good to go.
Yeah, I just hope that the architects have been honoured or will be honoured in this because
Yeah.
they got the rough end of the straw here. The short end of the straw. The rough end of the straw. Is there a rough end of a straw?
The glass of spoiled milk. I
Yeah.
almost said soiled milk, which implies something very different, doesn't it?
They were given a glass of soiled milk, historically speaking.
Ouch.
I just hope that they
I'm laughing
get...
so hard that my injured rib hurts now.
Yeah, I just think that they need to be honoured, and maybe somehow the family of the... I know it sounds a bit maybe sincere and earnest, but...
Well, does this podcast count, or is this more of a humiliation?
I don't know. I don't know if this really will go any way to healing the wounds.
Let us hope so. Anyway, that is the Cuban School of Art.
Incredible.
Producer Lewis here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Where Did Everyone Go? New episodes every Wednesday and Sunday. Follow, comment, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out.